Okay, so I understand that you are relatively new to the publishing world. Is that right?
Yes, Divinity's Twilight. You can, if I can get my finger going the correct direction with the reverse screen, there you go. The poster board I had made before coronavirus came out, and I was planning to go to all these conferences and events and different things. And of course, none of
Yeah.
that happened. But it was put into the publication pipeline last August. And it's been an
Awesome.
exciting process. I've learned a lot. I've discovered that you don't just write a book and put it out there and people buy it, that there is this
Right?
thing called marketing, which is a million times harder than putting anything to page. Mm-hmm.
Well, so my experience is that most authors feel that way because most authors have been writing and world building and creating for years before they ever sat down and wrote their first book. But
Mm-hmm.
marketing is a whole new thing. And marketing, once you get the handle of it, is just as easy as writing a book and just as hard.
I actually have a little bit of a background in economics of a sort. I had a business minor in college and then a finance major on top of my engineering. But it's just I say it's harder because it's not enjoyable. It's what do you want to be doing, and I'm sure that you're
Right.
the same way with everything. That it sucks energy out of you rather than puts energy back in.
Well, and I think the trick with that is finding the right marketing. A lot of authors are NJFT. And so, and that's for those who don't know, that's the Briggs Myers personality. They're introverts.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and doing things like conferences and going to live events is very energy sucking for those who are introverts. I'm an extrovert, so doing public speaking and things like that, I thrive. I get really excited. The more energy the audience has, the more energy I have. It's amazing. But for a lot of authors, that's not the way for them to go. And when you use that kind of marketing that you're not comfortable with, it shows. And when you feel completely sapped at the end of it, or even in the middle of it, it shows. And then it comes across as you not wanting to be there, which actually
Mm-hmm.
turns your audience away. So finding a nice balance of that. I love, if you've ever seen George R. R. Martin on YouTube, he has tons of book signings
Mm-hmm.
that it's like they have a limited number that they allow into the book signing. And I think it's because he probably is an INGFT.
This is when George R. R. Martin will shut down at this number we're estimating.
Right, yeah, yeah, and that's exactly. I mean, he's hugely famous, but he does these small groups. I think like 15 people, and he talks with them about the craft because that's what he's
Mm-hmm.
passionate about. And he doesn't do these readings. That's boring to him. He talks about, how he builds his world and things like that because that's interesting to him and it's interesting to his fans. And so being able to go to one of those types of events, and then he signs afterwards, of course, much more effective marketing for him than going to Comic-Con where he would get overwhelmed. So finding that niche and finding what works for you, and then of course hiring out the stuff that you don't enjoy doing is a totally practical way of doing business for sure.
Mm-hmm. Well, what I've done is it's you of course start with the social media. You have your Instagram, you have your
Mhm.
Facebook, your Twitter, your YouTube. YouTube presence isn't as big, but from there I've branched off. Of course, you have BookBub, you have Kobo, you have all the different things that you can do. And I think that my greatest tool that I found is Canva. That you can make incredible
Yep.
graphics that to convey information and you use those through your social media rather than writing a block of text that I had to break myself of that as an author that you want to write blocks of text. That's literally what your job is to convey description and information to the reader in an interesting way. But no matter how engaging your little blurb might be, if it is more than 3 sentences, you're going to lose a potential reader. That there is a very targeted, a very lightning fast delivery to marketing that is sort of ironic, given that the goal is to get people into a doorstopper, into a 500-page book. That
Right.
it's what's the word I'm looking for? Counterintuitive.
Yeah, well, you have to keep in mind the medium for sure. And it's awesome that you've learned that early on, because that's something that after 11 years, I still struggle with, even though I know, but I constantly, like when I'm writing blog posts and when I'm writing social media content, I'm constantly having to do far more editing of that than I should after as many years experience.
Editing is the bane of everybody's existence, no matter what kind of editing it is. I found that what's probably my most effective thing, actually Instagram, I'd say, with bookstagrammers and booktubers, that is their primary medium, and reaching out to them on that platform. And I found that sending just an engaging message, 2 or 3 short paragraphs, a picture of the book, a website, and various things like that is the best way to engage them too. And then that is your, as my publisher likes to say, guerrilla marketing. Have you ever heard the term? Yes.
Yeah, guerrilla marketing is also grassroots marketing, is another common term.
That your goal is to engage people without spending money, which technically you are if you give them a free physical book or an ARC or something like that. Ebooks don't cost you anything, of course. But I find that, again, paying it forward, give them a book, that it's an incredible investment. They like it, you like it, and then they present it to their audience. It's a win-win.
If you can get in with the Bookstagram group and you get 10 or 15 of them that all buy the same book, then everybody else jumps on that bandwagon on Bookstagram. Same thing with BookTube. If you give away 10 or 15, you'll get 30 or 40 in sales if you can catch their interest and get them talking about it. So, and that's so effective. Even the traditional publishers are paying for that. So
now here's an interesting question. So you said you've been in the business for 11 years?
Yes.
Okay. So during that period, things changed, that there was an increasing digitalization. There was the self-publishing boom. There was all of that. My question was related to Booktuber and Bookstagrammers. What do you see the ratio of authors to readers being in that, or reviewers to readers? Basically, professionals versus non-professionals, the ones consumers versus producers.
Right. Honestly, it's a pretty even blend. All the readers on Bookstagram want to do Bookstagram. And they all share pictures, but most of them don't get paid. So professional in that sense, not so much, but they all would like free books. They all would like to build their audience up. In my experience, giving a free book away to a Bookstagrammer that has less than 15,000 followers usually doesn't help to create that wave, but it does help to create goodwill. So you have to look at, where you are in things, where they are in things, and what they're building to determine whether or not you want to give a book away.
I'm totally in the building goodwill stage, that I'm giving books to basically everyone. And I'm perfectly happy to do that. That it's more about building your name, building your brand, than about making any money. You're probably going to lose money on your first book. That's something that I've come to accept.
Yeah. And then the big thing is, do you have a series? Do you have the next book planned? So
the next book's done. It's in beta reading.
Okay, so you're well on your way. So yeah, right now you're building the audience for that second book. And that's one thing that I have found about, well, more so BookTube than Bookstagram, because I haven't had a whole lot of first book releases since because I'm that old. Um,
You're on book
Instagram's
27.
relatively new. No, I'm not.
No.
I have 10 books, but they're all in series, and I haven't
Mhm.
started a new series in a while. So, but when you get them hooked on that first book, they'll
Mhm.
continue buying through.
Mhm.
And you don't have to give away as many in the second book and as many in the third book.
Mhm.
So looking into that aspect, it does certainly build on itself, especially if you build those relationships with those who are not big name,
Mhm.
but will be by book 3, they have built up a much bigger audience and they're thrilled to continue supporting you because you supported them when they weren't a big
Mhm.
name. So, but yeah, as far as ratios to readers to professionals, it really is, they say don't target authors as your audience, but why? We all read.
Mhm.
Now, should you just build your audience of authors? No, because they're going to want you to buy their book just like you want to have them buy yours. But the number of people that, if somebody is doing Bookstagram, if somebody's doing BookTube, they're a reader. Even if they're an author too, they're a reader, and they're probably a reader first.
Mhm.
So adding them into your circle is never a bad idea.
Because the reason I say that is that since I've started writing, it not quite full time, but most of my time, that you tend to want to do other stuff when you're not writing. That you still read, of course. There are genres and different topics that you enjoy, and then you have to do research. But that I'd rather go and play a game, or go and watch a show, or go and work out, rather than read once I'm done, because you don't want to dive back into another world when you spent all day in your own world. That there is a little bit of fatigue. I don't know if you experienced that.
Mine was, there was always so much to do. I had to make reading a priority, so I schedule reading time. And
No, that's a good idea, that you need to schedule your life. That if you say that I'm going to do this at this time, that you build a habit, you force yourself to do it, and then it eventually becomes enjoyable. It's something that you look forward to.
Right. And also that was the big thing, is I read an hour before bed, and it's just for entertainment. It's not for learning. It's not for education. It's not for growing my marketing experience or any of that stuff. Entertainment reading an hour before bed every night. And I'd like to say I keep that every night, but I'm human. There are some nights where I don't, but having that set and having that planned. But I think that's the case with most readers. Reading, especially reading for entertainment, you have to choose to make it a priority. A lot of us, I was just in a discussion in a book reading group on Facebook. We were talking about, how many books did you read when you were in high school, when you were in college, compared to what you read now? And is it that your lack of love of reading or is it your love of reading that's changed, or is it that just life happens? And really, that's, a lot of us have experienced, because of COVID, life slowed down a lot and we read a lot more. And then we came out of lockdown and we're struggling to get our reading in. And it's true, we just, as adults, don't have as much time as we did even in college to read.
Which actually, that brings up a good point with coronavirus, the pandemic. Since you have a bunch of books out there, mine didn't release till June 2nd at the tail end of the pandemic. So I have no baseline. I have nothing to compare variables with. And that's my engineer side. I love statistics. I love hard data. But looking back at the start of the pandemic, March, April, did you see a dip in book sales?
So I'm actually in the process of re-releasing all of my books because my publisher went under a year ago. So I didn't have any books for sale, but I have been very closely watching what's going on with other people. And a lot of authors talked about having a huge dip in their sales, but other authors saw a spike. And the reason that happened is the same reason that some businesses really struggled when the pandemic hit, and other businesses were up and running and thriving within days. And it's all about your ability and willingness to adapt.
Okay, so I see where you're going. This circles back to our marketing conversation. It's the people that went from in-person advertising to virtual advertising, that they were able to still get.
Yeah, or who targeted what was going on. Newsjacking is a common term in the marketing world, where you find something that's in the news and you find a way to tie your thing to that news. It's a great way to trend on Twitter. It's a great way to get in higher rankings on Google when you're doing stuff like that. But when, there were a lot of people that the pandemic hit and everybody, I don't know what I'm going to do. I shut down. I panicked. Oh, I have to cancel all these conventions and, all this stuff. And then there were others that went, you know what? While you're stuck at home, here's something to do. And they put their books out and they started promoting their books around the pandemic. So they were targeting the keyword COVID and promoting their books. And especially those that had happily ever after endings or that showed, Grimdark suffered. Even those that tried to adapt, Grimdark really struggled. A lot of them were just like, I think that's
understandable.
They can't handle this. But epic adventures and ones that exotic places to explore, showing survival, all of those using that messaging saw a huge boost in sales and a huge boost in reviews because the average reader doesn't have time for reviews except when they were stuck at home for 2 months and all they had time to do was read and review and cook and bake. And some of us realized that baking is not the best thing for our waistline. So we focus more on reviews.
I didn't do any baking. I did a bit of cooking, but my cooking is very rudimentary. It's rice, a vegetable, and meat, and then I blend it all together. It's like a stir fry.
There you go.
Repeat ad nauseum.
Yeah. But yeah, definitely being able to adapt and retarget and look at where your audience is hanging out. I noticed that there was also a huge shift. People weren't doing Twitter as much. And about the end of March, Facebook wasn't as popular, but everybody was on Instagram because they wanted to see the happy and the positive, and they were so sick and tired of all the negativity and the hostility and all that stuff. And it's harder to do that on Instagram.
I'd say the other big social media that I frequent is Imgur, and that's another one that they're very positive. It's an upbeat community. They do a lot of events throughout the year, giveaways, Secret Santa. It's a place where people go to unwind and de-stress, and I had a lot of success on there. A bunch more views than I thought I would about launching the book. And so I got traffic from there, traffic from Facebook, Instagram, not Twitter. My presence is minimal. It's maybe a tenth of my presence everywhere else. I hear authors say that Twitter is their bread and butter, but I don't really see it. It could be what you were mentioning there, that there's a downturn. Yeah,
well, since Twitter has become kind of really focused on all of the political stuff that's going on. And so book Twitter has struggled because of the overwhelming, all the booktubers on Twitter, all they're talking about is Black Lives Matter, which is a good thing, but that's not what they're talking about on their YouTube channel. They may have done 1 or 2 videos about it, but they didn't change their brand name to focus on Black Lives Matter. They didn't do all of that stuff. But on Twitter, you kind of have to. And if you're not willing to do politics or follow the mainstream politics, Twitter can become really toxic really fast. So I'm very careful with Twitter because I'm not into that.
You have to be careful with any social media that as an author, you are a public figure, that what you say makes a difference. We've seen that with many great authors during the pandemic. Not saying any names, but there have been people that have been affected.
Yeah, absolutely. That is true. And with all of the other just unrest that's been going on, I know one author was like, the only comments that I get on my posts are when I post about political stuff. And I was like, yeah, but they're negative comments. And he's like, yeah, but isn't the saying that there's no such thing as bad press? And I was like, we live in cancel culture. That's not true.
But, writing process in these times, you talked about the Myers-Briggs personalities earlier. That I feel like I can turn on charisma, that I can have a conversation and engage with pretty much anyone on any topic, but I'm an INTJ. So I am the most introverted of introverted people that you can possibly get. The thinking, the judgmental. That's probably one of the two groups, like you said, that are mainly authors or thinkers or scientists, engineers, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I've been perfectly fine during the coronavirus. That I once told my parents that they asked me, well, how are you doing? And I said, well, I was made for this, that I've been preparing for this pandemic my whole life.
Yep.
But so nothing's really changed. That I've been getting actually a lot more writing done. That and you see that across the spectrum. A lot more progress. Marketing, I was able to devote entire days to that. So I feel like I had a really good launch. That I've established the social media platforms that we were talking about. And so I've just generally been productive. How about you?
Yeah, no, I was saying, hey, adapt before some of the big name people were saying it. And I was adapting. And yeah, I have found that the biggest thing is it's a lot easier to spend less time on social media because I don't do well with the negativity that's going on right now. So it's really easy to not want to check my Facebook and see who's talking about what new crisis that whatever happened. So it has given me a lot more time to focus on planning and marketing and the execution part, not so much the in the weeds interacting with other people part. But I've also found that you are able to get in touch with a lot more people that maybe were only once a week users, but then they needed that social outlet because they didn't have going to sports practice and going to this and going to that thing. And so they're spending more time online. And while there's been a little bit that's cut back as people are going back into the workforce, I still feel like there's still a lot more engagement than there was pre-pandemic because now they're hooked.
A lot of people came back to social media. I noticed a lot of, like we were discussing earlier, bookstagrammers and booktubers that had taken a break got back into it, and now they're keeping up with it, producing more content. And I'd say that we also see a lot of new authors that, like I said, I'd been planning to release for over a year. That this pandemic hit and I had to adapt like you had to adapt. But there's a lot of people that are now taking their first strides, that they have decided that they want to write a novel, that they want to hop into the business. And so I don't know whether this will color their experiences in any way. I don't know what you've seen. Have you talked to anybody that's just starting the journey?
I have not. I've had a lot. Well, I shouldn't say just starting. There are a lot of people who have been talking about writing a book for years that have finally sat down and finished their books. And now they're like, okay, what do I do next? I was like, edit. And they're like, wait, but I just edited. I was like, nope, whether you're going to self-publish or whether you're going to go traditional publish, edit. And I recommend Pro Writing Aid to everybody that I talk to. I still use it because, again, I tend to be wordy. As you can hear while we're talking, I do it while I speak. So, of course, I do it when I write. But, yeah, Pro Writing Aid is the #1 tool that I recommend to anybody who's at the editing stage. It makes it easier, and as you pointed out, most authors hate editing. It makes it a little less painful to me.
Oh, because the fun in it, this might be slightly off topic, but the fun in writing, of course, is developing the unknown, whether you're a plotter or a pantster, an architect or a discovery writer, that you get enjoyment out of creating the new, out of the next character sequence, the next scene, the next big twist or reveal. And once all that's laid out on paper, that joy sort of goes away, and it's all about tweaking the mechanics. That you're trying to make everything better, but you've already seen it. You've already played out the scene a million times, and so you sort of lose interest. And bringing up another big name, Brandon Sanderson, that he says that he hates his books by the time that he's done. That he doesn't want to see these characters again. And then
Yeah.
he leaves them, goes to another project, and then comes back to the characters a few years later.
Yeah. Yeah, that is definitely true. And that's easier to do when you have a team of editors that you work with. But I like the editing part. For me, it's but I'm also a detailed planner. I'm a nitpicky person. And so being able to go through and tweak and change word flow and choose better wording and whatever, I enjoy that more. I can write a whole book in like 2 weeks. But then the tweaking and the adjusting and the planning and the making it ready to publish, that'll take me another 3 to 6 months.
So I'm sort of the opposite, that I try to be 95% finished on the first draft, that I average around 600 to 700 words an hour. I'm extremely slow. But in the middle of that, I am stopping and thinking about word choice, about sentence structure, varying the sentence structure, and what word I start the sentence with. I'm thinking about going and researching or pulling up a thesaurus and doing, if the sentence has to have a lyrical quality, if there's a poem, making sure, or whatever, insert song or something like that, that it's perfect. And so I try to do everything on the first draft, and then back and just make little spot fixes.
Right. And I used to do that as well. And I found that I would get stuck or frustrated. And I'm one of those, I'm a linear writer. I don't do well writing this scene and then writing that scene and writing the other scene. And then I would get caught up in researching and this and that and the other thing. And it just slowed me down so much. And Andy Peliquin is actually the one who taught me. He's like, when you have a spot where you're not sure if this really works, just make a note on the side and then keep writing. Finish writing that scene. Don't let that scene stop you from writing, which has been amazing advice. And using that has been able to allow me to get the story, because I usually dream my stories. So I have the whole thing plotted out in my head from the very beginning. Also, I write urban fantasy, so I don't have to do a whole lot of world building, which is kind of lucky.
Well, no, I'd say that there's an equivalent amount of world building, because I don't know if you saw Andy Peliquin's Fantasy Fiends from the other day. I was on his panel for Battle of the Magic Systems. And we were discussing the inclusion of fantastical elements in a low fantasy setting in real world. And he brought up the point that, well, if you have all these wizards and warlocks running around, well, why hasn't that affected technology in some way? Why haven't they, if you have healing magic, why haven't we found a cure for cancer? Or why isn't genetic redistribution or gene therapy a thing? That you can take these incredible powers and alter the present day world. And my series, we talked about that a little bit, because I use a very hard magic system with what's called magtech, that there is a crystal and the magic feeds into it, so that technology has gone a different route than in the real world, that they've skipped different points in the tech tree. Have you ever heard of the game Civilization?
Yeah, my husband.
Yes, that's why I always use tech tree. There was all these different routes that you could take through it and get gunpowder and get plastics and all the different stuff. But you basically have anachronistic elements, that you have electricity and you have airships instead of jets and stuff like that. But you also have people running around in chainmail and with rifles, because magic has substituted for weaponry, that they're further behind on that than on the means of transportation and the means of providing infrastructure and quality of life improvements.
Yeah, and see, mine's a little more, I don't know. I don't have to do as much world building. You've obviously chosen to do a lot more, which is awesome. But yeah, being able to write quickly, get the story out, and then go through and edit. And it also allows me to have different focuses, which, again, with that detail-oriented brain of mine, makes it easier. So when I edit, I usually do like 3 or 4 passes. After the first story is done, I'll do 3 or 4 passes. The first one, I'm looking at character development, making sure everything is there. The next one, I'm looking at plot development, making sure everything is there. And then the third pass, I will be looking at flow and structure. And And then I pass it to an actual editor. I mean, I'm an editor, but I don't edit my own books and say I'm good, because we're all blind to our own mistakes. So I got a professional editor to look at my work as well.
Of course. You always want multiple people to weigh in. So what I do, or at least what I did for Divinity's Twilight Rebirth, I have 2 more books in the pipe. The next in the series, which is with beta readers. So that's part of my process. And then the second book is an Asian standalone set in the same universe, that I'm essentially developing a sphere, a grander universe instead, with worlds in it. And each of the worlds have different magic systems, different races, different species. In Divinity's Twilight, humans are called Terrans, and they're one of 7 races. But elsewhere, I just call them humans for simplicity's sake, especially if it's a standalone. So first pass, you do your first draft, you get through that. Then I will actually, it's one of the cardinal sins of writing, I will very quickly, within the next day or so, go back through and do a line/copy edit of my own work. I'll try to ferret out anything I think that I did wrong. And then after that, I'll pass it to beta readers, get their feedback on the plot and the character elements. Then I'll make fixes based on that, after which I'll do another read through of copy and line edits, and then I'll send it to a professional editor. And again, like I said, I'm really bad about this. Anytime I see my work and I'm not engaged with something else, I'll just pick it up and start reading. And then I'll go and grab a pen and start making notes on it.
I do that too. I print mine out. I don't just work on, because you see different things in different formats. And then also when I get it all set up and ready to publish, I'll read it on Kindle, and then I'll read it in EPUB, looking for any last mistakes. And primarily I'm focusing on layout, but I catch other stuff too. It always happens.
Actually, it's funny that we have this discussion, because I had a dream that somewhere in Divinity's Twilight Rebirth, that there were 3 typos in the same sentence. And I dived into the book this morning. I was like, where were those typos? I didn't find them, of course, but I just dreamed that I had 3 words that were not proper nouns randomly capitalized in the same sentence. And it freaked me out. I woke up in a cold sweat.
See, authors are completely normal, guys.
Yes.
Joe was asking what advice I would give to anyone who might not have had the opportunity to go out and do signings and events. My advice would be start building your lists now, because signings will happen again. The reality is that while your book has just released, and that's the best time to do it because it's the hot new thing, especially if you have a series, you'll be doing another signing when the next book releases. So build those lists. The other thing is, a lot of people were like, oh, they're not doing conventions. I'm just gonna, oh, well, that completely ruined that plan. I'm just gonna completely pivot to social media. But most conventions are still happening in an online format. And as Joe and I know from years of doing B2B SciCon, virtual conventions are absolutely amazing opportunities, not only to interact in a safe space where you're not feeling overwhelmed, especially for all of us introverts that don't do well being in crowds. Online conventions are amazing because you don't have to deal with the crowds. You can take a half-hour nap and then come back. It's no big deal. But also because you're creating tons of SEO content, because almost every convention has video content that's being created. And if you're getting tagged in that, that's going to help boost your name on ratings. If you're very careful and make sure that you mention your book and that you mention your genre. And if you can get the coordinators to add those into the tags, that is great for SEO. There's tons of opportunities for social media posting, for blog tours are very common as part of the conventions, because they try to get multiple different outlets to tie everybody in together. And so taking advantage of those is a great boost for your social media.
So 2 different responses to that. First one, that related to signings and virtual signings and conventions, which do you think builds audience loyalty better? If you were to meet the same reader at a physical convention versus a virtual convention, which one do you think you would best be able to make them a reader for life?
So I think that neither one in and of itself will do it. Readers are people and they need more than one touch to build that audience and build that relationship. So with either of those events, your goal is to get them into your social media and continue building that relationship through social media to not only make them a reader for life, but make them a brand advocate, make them want to promote your works. That being said, I think a lot of it depends on your type of personality. And it also depends on your audience and their type of personality.
Everyone says that if you're able to directly engage with a person, have a face-to-face conversation, that they're more likely to buy the book, that you're going to get the same number of sales virtually through your social media, through your website, through different means of trafficking readers. But that if you do it in person, that it's more of a guarantee that if you're sitting at the front of a Barnes and Noble or the front of a convention or something like that, and you're saying hello to every person, that you're displaying your product, that you're engaging with them on a one-on-one basis, that it's more likely to make that connection, to make a sale. You don't necessarily have a lifelong connection, like I said.
Right, but that's absolutely true. If you enjoy talking to people, you're able to create easy, comfortable conversations in short snippets and not get stuck talking for too long, because you got to keep that line moving. And you can maintain the energy. But again, for a lot of authors, 30 minutes of that, and a lot of times, like I went to a signing and I love this author, and I'm not going to name this author, but this author is an amazing author. I love the world they've built. And because I understand authors as well as I do, I understood what was going on. But the whole time she was sitting like this, and her handler was amazing and was talking to everybody and welcoming them and greeting them and giving them the book. And then she just signed, and then they moved on. She didn't make eye contact. She didn't engage. And that, if I only knew that of her, I would have been like, that was an awful, horrible experience. I'm never going to read another book.
Most people blame the person. They don't, and they shouldn't. They
don't understand. Well, and they're misreading. They're seeing, oh, she didn't really want to be here. She doesn't care about me as a fan. I'm not important to her. And especially if you have young audiences, teenagers who are super excited and they're fangirling or fanboying, and then you won't even make eye contact with them. That's a major turnoff. But again, that comes down to knowing your personality. If you know that you do better in crowds, like I would rather get in front of a huge audience, talk to the huge audience, than talk one-on-one. I don't do so well with one-on-one, unless we have guided conversations like Joe's providing for us today.
Thank you, Joe.
And part of that is because keeping it tight and keeping it concise, that's something that I struggle with. But with an audience, a large audience, I can script it. I know exactly what's going to be said. I know exactly what's going to be done. My theater days have really educated me for that. And then once they're in the line, I can go back to what I talked about before. It's easy conversation. I don't have to try and make something up as I go along.
My public speaking was Model UN, if you've ever heard of that, and then International Relations Organization in college that I participated as a delegate, had a lot of fun doing that. Standing up, speaking about policy, parliamentary procedure, all that. And then I used to write scenarios. That's where I got started with writing, was being a crisis director for Model UN and coming up with all the cool twists and turns and different things. And what were a few of the ones I did? I did a Sengoku Jidai, the Warring States period of Japan. I did a Crusades. What else did I do? And so these were special scenarios. These weren't the primary UN. The people in New York are not dealing with the ancient past and feuding warlords. It's for the audience's edification. But if you have a bunch of high schoolers or a bunch of college students and they're all gathered together on a weekend, so they're away from school, away from their normal structure, how do you convince them to keep structure, to keep engaged with whatever content you're giving them? And it's really cool. It's almost like having a room of beta readers, because you can tell when they're flying off the handle, when they're running out into the hall, they're going to the bathroom repeatedly, when they're constantly asking for unmoderated caucuses, which is basically when they can mill around and do whatever, when there is no structure. And so when they want to stay in the room, when they want to keep working on what you've given them, that means that you have a good product.
Right.
So here's that second thing that I mentioned earlier, related to live events. And this is something that I've done during coronavirus. But of course, you have to have excess stock to be able to do this. If you had books that you were planning to take to a convention, that was great for this. And what I've done is I've gone around to all my local bookstores or book hangouts and different things like that as they've started to open up. And I leave them a signed copy for their break room. So one, I'd say local author, and I've done this across Virginia within probably a 100-mile radius, give or take, of where I am. And go in and say, I'm a local author, this is the genre, this is who I am. I'm going to be able to do live signings once the coronavirus ends, once you guys open back up for that. But for now, have a book, read it in your break room. You engage with the customer relations manager, and hopefully somebody there reads it and enjoys it, and they want to carry it. I know that a few of the Barnes and Nobles that I've gone to, and especially the local bookstores, the book warehouses, the smaller ones, where it's I don't want to say a mom and pop shop because it's not necessarily that, but that they are homegrown, that they're grassroots. And they especially like to carry local authors. And I've had a lot of success with that, that as they open back up, they've pledged that they're going to carry the book when it comes out in September.
They're also a lot easier to get book signings for, especially if you're, depending on where you are, obviously, but if you're in a smaller area, it's a lot easier to get a book signing with an indie bookstore than it is for Barnes and Noble. And then when you're in a bigger area, it depends on your competition. I have a hard time in Salt Lake. There's a lot of authors.
So back when you got your start, back 11 years ago, what was the best piece of advice that you got then?
To self-publish, actually, because that was right as self-publishing was becoming more of a thing and less stigmatized. And I actually started with an agent. I had an agent for 2 years. That I was promoting my Claire Angell Chronicle series through, and she got me 3 or 4 contracts that they all were, well, okay, there were different things. The best one, the only one that I was like, okay, this seems like a legitimate publisher that I would be willing to invest my time and energy with. He wanted me to change Claire's name because he was like, Clear is a weird name, and the reader's going to get confused. And that's going to be a problem.
As in it is
clear,
apparent.
as in it's so clear, yeah.
Yes, okay.
But her name is extremely symbolic because she's a psychic. And
in the world, there's other people in the world that have very meaningful names. Like I've seen worlds where people are named after colors, or that there is something that ties.
It's one thing to say, you need to change this name because it's a weird name, which personally I think as diversity becomes bigger in books, you don't find, people want unique character names, but beyond that, I got his point. It has been tricky to write because I can't use Clear in any other way so that people don't get confused. And I have had a couple of reviews where they were like, it was really confusing with her name. I kept reading it as Claire in my head. So they just changed her name. So clearly not everybody got the symbolism, which is probably my failure as an author. But that was one of those things that I was like, he had 3 or 4 other things that he recommended changing. I was like, I will do all of those other things, but Claire's name can't change. Literally, the series is about her name, really. And so he passed because he was pretty adamant. And then the other contracts were small press publishers that they weren't going to release it in paperback unless I paid extra, or there was just a lot of weird. Anyway,
they were vanity press.
Well, they weren't vanity press. They were focusing on ebooks, and they were probably small independent publishers that were riding that bandwagon of self-publishing. and they were basically self-publishing other people's books.
So basically they were like contractors that they went and gathered the resources for you and did it, and then took a big piece of the pie as a result.
Took most of the pie. Yeah. And I was looking at that, and my friend was like, you should seriously look at independent publishing, because you have the skill set to do it. And I was like, I don't know, I'll have to wait until my contract's up. But then by the time my contract was up, I tested 2 children's books that weren't under contract, just to kind of feel out the water. And if you can sell children's books online, you can sell anything online. And I was like, yeah, no, I can totally do this self-publishing thing. So I did. And 11 books later, here I am.
And actually, mentioning the name thing, I recently wrote a short story for an anthology coming out this December. It's themed around villains in fantasy. And the main character's name is Scraw, and it's literally the first word of the first sentence. Scraw, whatever. The rest of the sentence spirals off from there. And one of my beta readers wrote back and goes, "What's a scraw?" And I thought it was unique enough that it wouldn't be an object or place or something like that. And I said, well, it's his name.
Yeah. But you get away with it more in fantasy and urban fantasy, and urban fantasy starting to shift. But 11 years ago, it was not as keen on unique names. It was trying to be more grounded and less fantasy based. But I'm a huge fantasy reader too, so I struggle with keeping genres separate. I'm always blending genres, and that's the other thing that I love about self-publishing, is that you can do that a lot more easily than trying to pitch it to a traditional publisher. And the traditional publisher is like, well, we really want it to just be sci-fi, or we really want it to just be urban fantasy. And they don't so much love the mashups of genres. So
they want it to fit into neat little marketing categories, that there should be a bin where they can slot this and a shelf where they can place it.
Exactly. And the reality is that when you do write that way, it makes it easier to sell. I won't deny the fact that I didn't choose an easy path, but I'm telling the story that I love. And there are enough people that also love it. I also, write in 6 different genres. And so I'm having to build 6 different markets, because there's not a ton of crossover for me. But I have complete control over my career. And so awesome. I like that. I'm not a control freak, really.
So backing up again to the time when you had an agent, what was the query process like for you?
I think I sent out 40 queries to different agents. I was using, I think it was AWAA. It was the Agents Association, and they had a whole list of agents that were part of the association. And I sent out, over the course of a year, I sent out, I think, 40 queries. And I got 2 responses. And the one guy, when I looked up his ratings, he was not, I should have done more research. I shouldn't have trusted the AWA. But I was like, I appreciate it, but you took longer to respond, and this other lady already responded, so I'm going with her. But what I didn't realize when I made that decision was that she was based out of Australia. And the contract that I signed, basically anything that was sold outside of Australia, she would get 25% of my fees. When I read it, it didn't say outside of Australia. It said outside of mainland. And I was thinking US, because I'm in the US. It was later that I realized that. So it was a good thing that after 2 years, she didn't get me anything anyway.
She didn't make it clear for you.
Right. Well,
Sorry, that was a bad pun.
I followed. But yeah, you have to be really careful when dealing with contracts, and you probably should have somebody that at least has experience with legal documents. Ideally, an entertainment lawyer, but those are pricey. But it's worth it. If you're going the traditional route, you want to make sure that you protect your rights. Especially because if you look at other, like when it comes to movies being made and when it comes to merchandising, if you're going the traditional route, if you're not really careful with that first contract, you could end up making nothing off of any of that and having no say and no control. So definitely worth protecting your rights.
which is a great point on the business side, that, like I said, that I came into this with an engineering business mentality. So after writing the book, the first thing I did was set up the Divinity's Twilight Fantasy Novels LLC. That I am a business, that, and I have another two small owners that I have put into the business for tax purposes. And there is a lot that goes into it. So the marketing side, of course, is your social media, all of that. But there is the legal side, the copyright side, that technically, once you put something to page, that it is yours, it is copyrighted. However, it often behooves you, if you want to protect your intellectual property, to get an additional copyright. That you have to do that when you publish. You might do that before you publish. If you produce a physical book, you have to send 2 copies to the Library of Congress. That's part of the process. And there's all these little incidentals. There's your business license. There's the state. There's the federal. There's a whole bunch of different moving parts that go on that aren't related to writing and aren't related to directly selling your book.
Right. And that's the thing that trips up entertainers all across the industry, from sports people to actors to authors. If you're not taking care of that business piece, or if you don't hire somebody to take care of that business piece, you could end up in a lot of trouble. And
then another tip, save your receipts. Don't just get email receipts, physical receipts.
Yeah, keep those receipts. And take advantage of all the tax breaks, because you need them.
Yes.
That old adage, if you have to spend money to make money, it is definitely true.
So first book, what, like you said, was urban fantasy. What was the next genre you tackled? Because you said you've done 6.
Yeah, so I did, well, my first book is actually a paranormal thriller / detective mashup. So that's Claire Angell. And then I have the Claire Angell Chronicles. There's 2 books. And I'm almost done with the 3rd book in that series. And then I have an urban fantasy series called the Hunter Saga. And I have 2 books in that series out. And then the 3rd one is, I don't know, back there waiting for me to finish the Claire Angell Chronicles.
So the Hunter Saga, how do you avoid comparisons to Supernatural?
I don't. And I actually get slammed a lot for that. And I was like, my book was published 2 years before everybody became involved with Supernatural.
Because everyone automatically zeroes in on the most popular thing, and they assume everything else is derivative.
Right. And well, unfortunately for me, my hunters are, if you actually read the book, it's not even remotely like, because my hunters are actually supernatural. They hunt other supernatural beings to protect humanity. So there's kind of that tie-in, but not terribly. Also, they're not related, which would be super weird if they were, because they're kind of a couple, but not. It's weird. Anyway, it's complicated, but it's fun because even though the hunters are the main characters, every book is told from the perspective of the humans they're helping. So you never really get to know the hunters, but
that is an awesome literary device.
Yeah, and it's really fun playing with perception. So like in the first book, the story is told from the perspective of a 17-year-old who finds his town is infested with vampires. And he was a total nerd and geek growing up. He might or might not be the male version of me. He spent a lot of time fantasizing about the stuff that he was reading, like, maybe an apocalypse. Not about me at all. But anyway, so when he finds himself in the situation, he's the one that his friends are looking to, or his brother's friends really, are looking to save themselves, because they all know this is happening. They never thought something like this could happen. They don't even know where to start. So they're all relying on this 17-year-old, and they're mostly older than he is, 20 to 25. But then the hunters come to town and get involved, and they're trying to wipe out the vampires. And Chris is completely enamored with Fury. And so his perspective of Fury, she's like a classic fantasy badass woman. He absolutely adores her. She can do no wrong. She's mysterious. She's amazing. She's a badass. That's the perspective you mostly see. Well, then in the second book, we see her from the perspective of Screven, who is a character in the first book who gets bitten by a werewolf. It's been out long enough. If you don't know, it's okay. Anyway, and they're trying to help him, and they're tracking down the werewolf who bit him to make sure that the werewolf doesn't cause any more werewolves. Anyway, and so you see a lot of fury from Screven's perspective. And as far as Screven's concerned, she's annoying, she's obnoxious, she's bossy, and she's pussy. She's the same person, but depending on who's looking at her. And that's the case with, some people think I'm the most amazing thing in the whole wide world. Other people think I am just obnoxious and rude and horrible. I am
I think you're awesome.
But I'm the same person no matter who I'm dealing with. But their perspective and their attitude about strong women changes how they view my behavior.
It's interesting you should mention that, because I had a brusque, abrasive character, a woman, and a strong woman archetype. And I had two different readers, two different reviewers, both friends, both doing a buddy read of my book. And one of them loved this character, and the other one said, well, I don't like the way that she talked down to that one guy. And right. I of course was thinking about this, and this is just the way the character is. She's going to do that to everyone. But it was interesting, their reaction, because the first person that she was abrasive towards was a male. And this was a woman's perspective, which I found interesting. Well, both were women, and both had different reactions. So
yeah, but you also have to look at their personality type and their age and their culture that they were raised in. All of those will impact it. But it's really a fun challenge writing that series, because I get to do that every time. So it's really fun being able to play with those. And then in the third book, it's going to get even more interesting, because you're going to see them from the perspective of supernaturals who are familiar with what they are and how they should be. And that plays into a whole other fun realm of stuff. So
that's really neat. So that's a good segue. How much of yourself do you put into your characters?
Every single one of my books has one character that is me from a certain time period. And some of my closest readers, who may or may not also have been my best friends growing up, really have a lot of fun trying to pick out which character is Heidi, because it's almost never the main character. But there's always one that is me.
You're always the Stan Lee.
Yes, I totally do a Stanley. I really enjoy doing that. But as far as the rest of my characters, typically I try to create them based on people that I actually know. I tried playing with Myers-Briggs, but I find that it's too tempting to create stock characters by using that. And even though they'll feel a lot more real than just a character you made up that's just a man with boobs, which is a horrible fantasy, but you know what I'm talking about.
I do.
Having an understanding of that is great, but then having people that you can actually look at and go, okay, well, they did react this way and that way. And then being able to ask them, hey, would you do this in this situation?
Well, I've heard that before, that your goal as your author is to don the skin, the persona of your characters. And to do, like you said, to do that, you have to go back and reread. You have to figure out what their voice is, put on their personality again, and start from there. I tend to do, it's sort of similar but divergent from what you do, is I tend to pull out a key personality trait from myself, whether it is expressed or whether it is repressed. And that's the starting point. And then I decide what is one thing they love and what is one thing they hate. And so those define the extremes, and then I build a character between those with the core personality trait.
How did you decide to distribute?
I went wide for ebook, and that is because I'm with a small press, Morgan James Publishing. And so I went through a similar query process. I didn't do a whole lot of research. I'm satisfied with where I am. It's a very good company. But I looked at the first few authors and I chose one. And so I decided to move ahead very quickly into publication. I am looking at how it performs. The ebook launch went well. My Midsummer Madness promo I ran 2 weeks ago was fabulous. I was up in the reached top 35 in military fantasy and coming of age fantasy. And so that was great. And that was just with Amazon. I don't know how it performed on other sites, on Kobo, Google Play. What's the other? Apple Store. There's so many.
Oh, yeah.
So, real final question, and this is probably a good one to end on. Favorite book of all time, if you can do that.
I can't.
Okay.
It's not. I can't even pick my favorite book in a genre. I don't even think I can pick my favorite book in a series.